Greetings once again. It's a pleasure to be back, and it's a pleasure to have a conversation with you and see what we can do in the next series of episodes that we're going to create. So for today, I'm going to talk about new frontiers in clinical research and career opportunities that are emerging in these areas. And the reason as to why I'm doing this actually is informed by one conversation that I had with a friend. But at the same time, we need to ask ourselves, why do we need to look at these opportunities? So when you talk about new frontiers in clinical research and the career opportunities, we know that we have so many of our young pharmacists and actually healthcare professionals generally who are looking for opportunities, and these opportunities are where can they apply themselves in terms of shaping our healthcare system. But beyond shaping the healthcare system is how do they find fulfilling career opportunities? That is an important bit. But at the other end, we need to look at it from its clinical research. Why do we need clinical research? And the reason as to why I'm doing this particular episode is to highlight that for us, in terms of healthcare practice and healthcare workforce, we have to understand that this clinical research and clinical trials have a critical role in ensuring we have the right evidence, the right products that are available, and the right means of using them in our clinical patients that we are taking care of. Our health needs for healthcare services will always be there. It has always been there, and there's still going to be advances. And based on that fact that diseases and illnesses are still a part of our lives, and we have to find a way to alleviate the suffering and the pain that we go through, then the best way to get these products and services and actually solutions that can help address these is through research. And that research has to be about being done in from a clinical setting, being done in an ethical way, and it has to be done in a contextualized way. So what are the new frontiers of clinical research when you look at it from that standpoint? You know that clinical trials have been in place from time immemorial, and these clinical trials have been about doing research on patients or even in animals, whatever way it starts from the preclinical to the clinical trials. All the phases of research have been in place, and those phases of research are about generating evidence on whether the product is safe for human use, the level that could be used in terms of the strength of the product that needs to be used, what particular population, what diseases is it treating, and any other side effects or adverse event that might be identified in the course of the use of that particular medicine. So all the different information that need to be generated has been put into place, and it's actually being generated even now as we're talking in different research trials that are ongoing. So when you look at it from that standpoint, then you ask ourselves, what are the new frontiers on this case? The new frontiers are coming from one, most clinical trials from medicines that started long ago, the first that have been in the market. Most of the trials have not been done in our resource limited settings, especially in an African setting. And therefore, because of the pharmacogenomic differences and variabilities, then we see that these medicines might not be usable for effective as we had envisioned, or they might be having some difference in terms of the doses that are required for our local population. So because we don't have that contextualization, there's now a growing focus and actually an interest in having clinical trials conducted in resource limited settings, and low income countries, Africa being one of the regions that we're looking at in this case. Then there's going to be a need to invest and actually drive that research being done in an African setting. Then the other frontier that we need to look at it beyond the geographical region is to look at what are the new areas that are happening, what are the new advances. We move from small molecules, now we're talking about the biological products and even precision medicine and gene therapies. When these advances are coming in, there's going to be need for us to see how do we do clinical research with these novel therapies that have not been established in clinical practice. How do we deal with patients? How do we engage, and what are the endpoints for clinical trials? So those are some of the key things that are coming up. So there's a growing interest in terms of people doing clinical research in our settings, and the other bit is around now clinical trials which are dealing with innovative molecules. And also, it doesn't mean that other research is going to be declining, but there's also going to be a focus on the other molecules that we're looking at in terms of the small molecules. We're looking at biological products, we're looking at conventional therapies, and even the consumer products that are being used. There's still going to be a need to generate that evidence. And when we look at that, then we now need to see where are the opportunities going to come in. And these opportunities are based on the frontiers that I've mentioned, but they're also coming in the sense that what are the additional needs and what are the gaps and lapses that we're having in the current moment. So some of the lapses that we can see that for a fact is, why are we not having clinical trials happening in an African setting and most of the resource limited settings? One, regulatory frameworks and the policies that are in place. We don't have the capability to conduct trials because we don't have the guidelines that are recommended as per the international standards in most of our countries and most of our regions. Therefore, then it means for a clinical trial researcher who wants to venture into a particular to do a study in country, then their guidelines are not available, so they cannot do it. Those are limitations that we're going to deal with, and these are limitations that are existent and actually currently available within us. So do we have the guidelines? Then once we go beyond the guidelines and having a regulator, because even from a regulatory standpoint, there's been moved to establish national regulatory authorities, the regional regulatory authorities within the regional communities, and now African Medicines Agency coming up to have a continental view and overarching responsibility on that. So that is one bit we look at establishing regulatory authorities. But beyond the regulation of the clinical trial review of the dossier and everything, the ethical framework, because we have noted that there have been unethical practices in clinical trials that need to be addressed. And why? That is why when we look at the established ICH guidelines and all the different guidelines that we have on clinical trials, the good clinical practice guidelines establish that there must be an ethical review committee, an ERC, an ethical review board, institutional review boards. So these are to ensure that the conduct of the, as per the protocol, how it's going to be conducted, is meeting the standards as stipulated. In that case, it's going to be an ethical research. Do we have the capacity in our continent to have these ethical research boards? Most institutions lack the institutional boards, and even from national frameworks, most countries don't have the ethical review committees that are instituted, whether in the regulatory authorities or within research institutions, and these are going to be lapses. Then we go to the next phase where we're asking ourselves, for clinical research, they need to have certain set of facilities. It has to be, let's say, for example, in a hospital setting, that hospital has to have the required capacity in terms of workforce, equipment, and medical facilities that are needed in case of complications. Do we have that kind of framework and institutional frameworks? Those are gaps that still need to be filled. Then the other bit beyond that is to understand, do we have these researchers who understand the clinical endpoints and are able to collect the data and analyze it in a good way? When they're doing it, what are the gaps? What are the bottlenecks? So those are some of the key things that are also coming up in that particular frontier. And then the last bit, when we look at it from that kind of research in terms of regulatory and all that, we're looking at the ability of the workforce to be able to do that job. Then the next piece is, are we having clinical trials being conducted in this context, addressing the pressing global healthcare needs? So when we look at all these challenges and all the dynamics, because we still have healthcare needs, then what are the opportunities for you as a healthcare worker who is interested in clinical research and clinical practice, clinical trials? One key thing is to first know that clinical trials are informed by a need for a particular product to be developed. And the need for a medicine to be developed is driven by a particular disease condition. When we're dealing with COVID-19, it was because COVID was there, that's why medicine had to be developed for it, whether it's vaccine or it's a therapeutic product, whichever way it comes. So it means there has to be clinical need. So in our first phase of practice, the first opportunity that arises is, what disease areas are we dealing with in Africa? What particular diseases are affecting our patient populations in our fields of practice? Once we know that, we already have the initial touch point, because that is going to inform the development of the medicine, the development of the potential therapies that are going to come into the market. So we need to have epidemiologists. And that is where you see somebody as a pharmacoepidemiologist. You're able to analyze and synthesize that data and let us know, these are the potential disease area that we're dealing with, and these are the kind of intervention that we need. How can we develop therapies for them? And ultimately, those therapies will be taken through clinical trials and clinical research. That is the first point. Then beyond getting that data and actually establishing the disease area that need to be addressed, then you need to move to the point where the pharma companies, whichever researcher has done, the research organizations have worked on developing the therapy. You can't be the pharmacist or the healthcare provider who is helping generate and actually identify the medical product that is coming into the market. So that is another opportunity in developing the therapeutic product, the initial clinical lab research, the laboratory experiments and everything, analysis, the preclinical studies, then you bring it to the clinical setting. So that is also another opportunity. But within the clinical setting, the next opportunity comes in the sense that the protocol has to be developed. How do we test it in which patients? What is the critical criteria that we're going to see whether it's the right dose or not the right dose? So developing the research protocol, clinical research protocols, that is another critical bit that has to be done. And that is space where we normally have, for example, the clinical research specialists in regulatory affairs also, who are going to analyze the data, develop clinical protocols, and develop that kind of compendium that is going to be submitted for evaluation. So that is an opportunity. Are you keen in developing research protocols, doing documentation, analyzing the scientific principles and scientific specialties behind the use of a medicine? So that is another key bit. Once we are done, you have to move from that phase and have the protocol being evaluated either by the research organizations, the ethical review boards, or the regulatory authorities. That means we need ethical reviewers. That is an opportunity for you if you have a interest in clinical research to be doing ethical review of clinical research protocols and evaluation of the different information, including from the informed consent form and the assent forms to the protocol itself, the different instructions that are going to be used by the facilitators or the researchers that are going to conduct the research. You need to be able to evaluate that. Then from a regulatory standpoint, we also still need clinical research specialists who are able to do a review of these clinical trial application so that we know it is meeting the standards or not meeting the standard. That is another opportunity. Then once that review has been done at that particular level, and it means for these reviews actually, before we move to the next phase, before the reviews are done, we need to have a competent regulatory authority who is going to come up with the guidelines at the regulatory authority on how clinical research trials have to be conducted, how they need to be evaluated, and who is going to evaluate them. That is an opportunity. Ethical review boards, how do we institute them? How do we ensure that the different capabilities in the nation are meeting those research criteria that need to be put in place? That is an opportunity for you if you have an interest. Then once we're done with that particular level of research where you've done the initial reviews and everything, we need people who are going to actually conduct the research. And one of the key bits that I've noted in terms of research that I've been doing is that clinical research has to start from study design, where we need to engage communities. Over time, we've had aspects where from an African or a resource limited setting, most of the conversation have been, are we being used as guinea pigs? Are we being used as test subjects rather than as participants in the trial, because we are not engaged as early as possible? The cultural, the social context is not being factored into the risk trials that are happening. So to start those kind of conversation, we need to have these kind of engagements that are going to happen. So that is where we need clinical trial specialists and researchers that are going to engage with the communities. As a healthcare worker, that is an opportunity to be able to facilitate the study design with the local communities and start it early so that there's value that coming up. So beyond that engagement, you move to the next phase where you've had the study trial, you're rolling out the trial as it is once approved. That is where you need to collect the data. And in data collection, we need to ensure that the clinical endpoints are very clear and established. The test equipments and the facilities that are needed to ensure that the clinical trial metrics are monitored effectively need to be in place. That is another thing that we need to ensure is robust. Recently, actually last week, I was in a particular webinar, and we're hearing that less than 20% of the data that was generated during COVID-19 in the African context from clinical trials were less than 20 was of value, meaning more than 80% was of no value to us. But the question is, there were patients that were in that trials, there were physicians that were doing conducting the trial, that is the healthcare professionals. But beyond conducting the trials, there were patients that were done. There were resources that were pumped in. So of how much resources have we wasted over that period? So those are the kind of things that we need to ask. Is it efficient use of resources? Are we doing in a good way? And even if that information is going to be generated, what are the key contributors? Did we have the right qualified workforce? Did we have the right equipments? Did we have clarity on the endpoints? Or were we just complacent enough to let the trials go to waste? Those are key things that we need to look at. And then once we address them, we're able to ensure that we have a robust clinical research pipeline and clinical research pipeline that is getting us the quality medicines that are going to be used. Then we need clinical research statisticians who are going to analyze the final data that is going to be generated from the trial that are being done. Once you have the data, the analysis has to be done, the analysis has to be presented in a particular way. That is where the pharmacovigilance specialist would now come in the sense that we have the data, the statistician has analyzed it, the pharmacovigilance within a clinical research setting, you're now able to see the development safety update reports, aggregate reporting. Has it been done in a good way? What are the benefits and the risks? How do we compare them? Is it better for us to bring the product into the market or not? And give that clinical strategic advisory to the pharmaceutical developers to see whether they need to take it to pharmaceutical production or they need to stall that production and do further studies. That kind of guidance needs to be there. And the quality assurance person has to be in the chain to ensure that initially from the conception and inception of the idea to the ultimate end where we're actually taking the product to the market for clinical trials and moving it from trials to production and actually clinical use, there is robust quality practices. And on that case, then the other bit that also comes from a QA standpoint is to evaluate. One of the gaps that have been noted is we are adopting good clinical practices, good manufacturing practice and everything from that were developed for developed countries. In resource limited contexts, we are dealing with different contexts, different needs, different capabilities, and these have to be factored in. And that is where, from my QA specialist perspective, we're able to see, can we contextualize these particular guidance documents to meet our standards and our needs, and to ensure that we're able to conduct them better. So generally, when you look at all that, even in small molecules and large molecules, that is the biological, precision medicine, gene therapies, these are emerging areas. And as they are emerging areas, we need to ask ourselves, can I be the policy champion who is going to drive these kind of conversations to ensure guidelines are put in place in a contextualized manner? Can I be the researcher that is actually going to develop the product and conduct trials with the patient community? Or am I going to be the facilitator, looking at how the different components work together to ensure we have a collaborative ecosystem where every individual and every player is able to deliver on their mandate? So clinical trials is going to be a big thing, and it's already coming up as a very high heated topic that needs to be attended to. So as a healthcare professional, if you're looking at practicing in the clinical research setting, this is your chance. Venture in those study courses that are related to this, learn about it, discuss with experts in the industry, and let's see how we can shape the future of clinical research that ensures that our patients have the right access to the quality, safe, and effective medicines, but these medicines are actually tested on our local population so that we know it is safe and effective, and there's evidence to back that. And that is a critical thing that needs to happen. And clinical research is not only for the new medicines, it can also continue in available and existing therapies that can be moved to the next frontiers of care. So if you have an interest, please pursue such kind of interest. Read about them. If you have interest, reach out to us. We can also share some information in terms of the resources that we have access to, so that you keep growing and keep pushing yourself to the new frontiers of what we hope for. If you enjoyed these conversations, subscribe to the channel. Let's engage. Let's keep the practice advancing, because our mission is to ensure we have a robust pharma sector in Africa that is going to be able to shape that future with us. So for you, please engage, and let's make the best of it. Thank you.